Welcome to Shively and Shoulders. We have a great show this evening. The High Sheriff of Vanderburgh County will be joining us momentarily. We'll have a great session with him, a lot of things to talk about in the law enforcement world.
All ye seekers of wit and wisdom, prepare to be immersed from head to toe in the elegant wit and wisdom of Shively and Shoulders.
Before we begin with our honored guests here this evening, let's talk about some recent events in the political world.
Plenty to talk about there, Your Honor. Unbelievable, shocking to those that watch this sort of thing, that Cheryl Musgrave. In fact, we had two political science professors right here who handicapped that race for us, both of whom predicted Commissioner Musgrave as the victor in the Republican primary. To what do you attribute her devastating loss?
I attribute it not to the endorsements, not to the television, but to two people, Mayor Winnicky and his wife Carol. When they put their mind in favor of something or against something, they use all of their muscle and all their might. They were very instrumental in getting the vote out. As I said earlier, these primary elections are going to be determined by which candidate can get the voters out, and Natalie got those voters out.
Absolutely. When only 5,000 people vote in the primary, and it only took 3,000 to 1,000 to win that race, clearly turnout, your people to the polls, made the difference. But you mentioned endorsement. Do you think FOP now has to put an L in there for flop instead of FOP?
You're making fun of our law enforcement community out there.
They went right out on a limb, as did our newly elected prosecutor. Remember when she sat right here, and in the greatest unforced error in the history of new politics, she endorsed candidate Musgrave.
She's doing a great job. She's new to politics. Hey, I'll give her this one.
Well, it was silly to do that. It was a bonehead move to do that in 30 days after she's elected.
But she may not get a passing grade on politics, but she's doing a great job right now.
It appears. Now, we also have a new state budget, which credits all the book burners out there. I see the governor signed that bill. The Kinsey Institute, because God knows we don't need to know more about sex, was defunded. As a former IU trustee, you have to resent that a little bit.
I do, overall, because the Kinsey Institute's been around for how many years?
1953, it went under attack when Herman Wells was president.
And quite frankly, that is an old issue that was revived. Let me tell you something.
Time and again.
Let me tell you, this $44.5 billion 2-year budget needed to be focused on the real problems. Education. Absolutely. What they did with education, and I'm sorry I'm going to make some people angry here, taking money away from public education is not the way to deal with the issues.
This show will have a short future if you and I agree on too many things, but to continue to fund choice and charter and take it away from the public education that both you and I enjoyed and attribute our success to is sinful.
What's even more amazing is now the income threshold for a family to be entitled to vouchers is $225,000 a year. Oh, come on, that's ridiculous.
Well, it is, and you know, there are a lot of things if we had an hour show, but they have on here to talk about mass shootings. The Republicans will never do anything about guns.
I disagree.
They're absolutely in the NRA, which is an organization with no power anymore. But for some reason, they continue to say, let's deal with mental health, not guns. It's ridiculous, and we're going to continue to kill babies in this country until we wake.
Pat, I disagree with you. I think that there is bipartisan concern to deal with the gun issue, and I think we're going to see some leadership from both sides to get it done. One more thing on the budget. This session spent all this time trying to eliminate the state income tax, while all Hoosiers saw their property taxes assessments soar, their property taxes soar, and this is an increase in taxes when they don't have a corresponding increase in income. Why doesn't the General Assembly understand that you're taxing people's savings and wealth when you increase property taxes? And getting rid of the state income tax, to me, does not make any sense in modern times.
It is something that you and I can't explain until they give us the job. And finally, but we have a great guest today.
Yes, we do.
The strength of Shively and Shoulders is that we introduced in depth to the voting public a great new face in local politics. But before we go there,
yes, sir.
Explain to our viewers why you adhere, and you do adhere, to a strict judicial code of conduct, but the Supreme Court doesn't have to.
I'm somewhat amazed, but it's on both, I say both sides of the aisle. Elena Kagan also had a ethics lapse. She voted on a case that came before her that involved the publishing company that paid her $1.2 million in royalties.
I don't defend her either. I'm just saying, why
Overall,
doesn't the highest court in the land have to adhere to what a Vanderburgh Superior Court judge has to adhere to?
I couldn't agree more, and I tell you what, hope Chief Justice Roberts gets the message and they'll become more proactive. I do understand why they don't want to appear before a congressional committee. I get that. But they ought to take the bull by the horns and make those changes and make those rules to basically regulate themselves.
When you have neither the power of the purse nor the power of the sword, and you're the third branch of government in the judiciary, all you have is the respect of the public.
Exactly.
And the Supreme Court has lost it. How about you introduce our great guest for the day?
We have a super guest, Sheriff Noah Robinson, who was elected in January. When we come back, we got a lot of things to talk to the sheriff about.
Loyal viewers, many of you have heard the phrase, "There's a new sheriff in town." Well, by God, Shively and Shoulders has him right here on air. Welcome, Sheriff Noah Robinson, to the set of our luxurious studio.
I'm happy to be here today. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, we're happy to have you because your career has interested me. I need to make this admission. I was approached, how long? You were elected a year ago, November?
Well, you just elected actually last November.
November.
So barely 6 months.
So in the Democratic Party, there's a tradition that the Democratic sheriff has his chief deputy, and they've passed this down, and all the former sheriffs came to me and said, we need a contribution. And I think I wrote a pretty good-sized check to your opponent, Jason Ashworth, who was the anointed choice.
You didn't clear, though. But
Well, it might have bounced.
It's never too late to correct that. Right.
And so you bucked the Democratic hand the baton to the next guy and ran a heck of a race in that primary. Talk a little bit about, A, your interest in the job, B, knowing you weren't the anointed successor, and how you did it.
Well, it was a challenge to say the least. And so I had been the chief deputy for a while at the sheriff's office and really enjoyed the position. But Sheriff Wedding had a really tough choice to make. He had two people he really liked, and I think he believed that my opponent had the better chance of winning, and so he decided to back him, and I don't begrudge that decision. It was an unpleasant period in my career. I'm glad that part of it's over with.
But I mean, Eric Williams and Brad Ellsworth, they all backed the other guy, right?
Yeah, they did.
And so so grassroots, turning out the vote, how'd you do it?
I was extremely motivated. And so it was grassroots, and that's sometimes that term gets thrown around, almost a cliche, but it really was grassroots. It was just shoe leather, door knocking, just working hard every single free minute, and then getting a team together behind me that was willing to help out as well.
Was this your first attempt at public office?
Yes, it was, yeah.
How long had you been in the sheriff's department before you ran?
A little over 20 years when I decided to run.
So you knew the job.
Knew the job very well. Was very much a rookie to politics, which is, if you've never run before, it is an education.
Before we let the judge cut in here, because he does get to talk, was there a riff, and has it healed? Do you and Jason Ashworth speak? I mean, how the first thing Rasher said after she won was, let's put the party back together. Did you have to do similar things?
I've made a similar statement. In Sheriff Wedding, I talk all the time. I've not had a chance to really run into Jason in his new role. He doesn't work at the sheriff's office anymore, so I don't really have any day-to-day contact with him, but I would certainly be happy to sit down with him and have a chat.
I see.
Well, I want to say this. And I've had the pleasure of working with two other sheriffs since I've been judge, Sheriff Williams, and Sheriff Wedding. But you really hit the streets running. You've helped us out so much at the courthouse, for example, courthouse security. I made a couple suggestions. Next day, things changed. And I've also noticed that there's some transition. People are in different places.
Sure.
But morale seems to be good.
Yeah, morale's great. That was one of the things that was very important to me, as you alluded to earlier, was when we came back together after these two very contentious races, that we put politics aside in January when I took office and moved together as a complete agency. And so there were a few minimal personnel changes to accomplish that goal, but I set the tone very quickly, letting everybody know that we're all on equal footing here. I just want good people in the best positions doing their job with no other considerations.
Okay, let's talk to some of the, we talked about the nice stuff, your accomplishments thus far,
Yeah.
mostly political. Let's talk about some of the real challenges.
Yeah.
Building or expanding the jail, and with that, expanding the workforce for the jail. Where are we on that?
We're making great progress. And so Sheriff Wedding put together a good jail plan. It was handed to me, and we didn't view it as a clean sheet redesign, but I had a slightly different vision for how that expansion should occur. It was important to me to have a mental health area in the facility that was a non-negotiable.
We appreciate that.
Thank you very much. It was a non-negotiable for me, was to have a strong mental health component. I was not content to just do the same thing we always do, which is add more jail cells with no long-term plan to prevent recidivism. So we got the mental health unit in the plan. We redesigned the cell layout to be smaller cells, more efficient, safer. And council looks willing to fund that now, and so now we are in the final design phase of the interior portion, and I hope to break ground by the end of the year.
Great.
Those are challenges inside. Let's talk about challenges outside. In this last mayoral primary, the number one issue on the commercials, and I'm going to guess it'll be in the fall, is crime, guns, a shooting a week in the city of Evansville. Your law enforcement, talk about that.
Yeah, it's been challenging for the city of Evansville and Vanderburgh County as a whole, because we have seen an increase in gun-related crime. There's no denying it. Shootings are up and murders have increased. And it's not unusual for us to crest 20 gun-related homicides in a year at this point. And so it was important to me to hit the ground running, and so I immediately assigned a sheriff deputy to the ATF gun task force, which in some circles might be a controversial decision. But I believe in partnering with our federal partners and leveraging the assets that they can bring to the table.
Good for you.
And going after some of these criminals that are committing crimes with guns. I don't have a problem with guns. I have a problem with criminals in possession of guns committing criminal acts, and I want to go after those folks.
You know, the Indiana General Assembly last year passed a law eliminating the necessity for a carry permit. Has that made your job more challenging?
I spoke out loudly about that during the primary and the general, and when I wrote Eric Holcomb a letter asking him not to sign that law, because it was really getting the cart before the horse. In fact, it was a solution in search of a problem. It was so easy already to obtain a gun permit in Indiana for free, and now we have a law in the books that does not require you to get a permit. And so when a law enforcement officer pulls a vehicle over, he's blind. He has no idea if this person is allowed to possess the handgun or not, and simply does not have the time or the resources on the side of the road to conduct an adequate background check to determine whether this person is lawfully in possession of that gun or not. Now, the state legislature has committed to fixing some of these issues and creating a state database to better alert officers about someone's status as a felon, but it will never be as good as the previous system, which allowed for a lengthy background check, many of which were denied based on someone's mental health record, their past habits of domestic violence, and a myriad of other problems that would have made handgun possession unwise for an individual. So I'm still strongly against this law. I hope the legislature comes to its senses at some point down the road and brings back gun permits, because I think it's pointing us in the wrong direction at the very worst time.
You mentioned mental health. Indiana does have red flag law, or a combination of laws. Do you believe they're effective enough, and does your department make use of those laws?
I believe that we're fortunate that Indiana legislature passed it nearly unanimously in the heels of the death of Officer Jake Laird up at IMPD. And so there was bipartisan support for that red flag law. I'm grateful we have it, because when we use it, we really need it. But I'm worried about some of the whispers I hear coming out of the legislature that even that might be under fire. And so I hope that that does not get taken away from us, because it is used sparingly, only when necessary. But when you have someone who's standing in their front yard threatening to kill people, but no one specifically, so therefore no specific criminal charge,
Right.
we need a mechanism to disarm this individual and keep their neighbors safe.
Right.
Before we leave crime, I would say the prevalence of guns is a major contributor. Are there trends, citizens that, like all of us, that love this community, seeing this? As somebody who's been in law enforcement for 20 years, what would you attribute it to? That's maybe an unfair question, but I mean, why all of a sudden are we seeing a shooting a week here?
If you have the answer to that, you're probably going to be very sought after on other TV programs besides just Shively and Shoulders. And I wish I had an answer for you, but in my view and in my experience, few things are simple. And there's not just one cause or even two causes, the whole myriad of reasons that come together to result in an outcome that nobody wants. And so whether you call it the breakdown of the family, social media and Facebook bullying, a gang culture, video game violence, all these things are easy targets for individuals to go after as here's the cause of gun violence. But I think it's a more of a complex issue than just one or two things. I can say from a law enforcement perspective that, and I know Chief Billy Bowen shares my conviction for this, it is all about catching kids when they're young, showing them the right way to behave, making them feel part of the community, setting good examples for kids, parents doing that, law enforcement officers doing that, teachers doing that, holding kids accountable when they get older and not letting them slip through the cracks. And then when these crimes happen, holding people accountable. You have to hold people accountable when they commit crimes with guns.
I think that's a well-stated and well-reasoned opinion. Now tell us what else we're going to see in the Robinson first term. What other initiatives? We've mentioned the jail. Les has given you credit for already making some things happen at the courthouse. What else are you going to do? When you came into office, there were things you saw you didn't like. What are you going to change?
Yeah. That's been one of the most rewarding aspects of coming into office, is the opportunity to fix some of the things that weren't necessarily wrong, but you knew could work better. And one of those things was creating a community-based policing strategy for the Sheriff's Office. We have traditionally not done that well. And so later on this summer, we're going to be rolling out a neighborhood-based policing initiative where sheriff deputies will be assigned specific residential areas in the county, and those deputies will get to know the residents who live in those subdivisions and neighborhoods and apartments and attend those neighborhood-based meetings, those HOAs, those crime watch meetings. And those individuals in those various neighborhoods will have that deputy's work cell phone number and a point of contact. So fewer things slip through the crack, more information comes into the sheriff's office, we solve more crime, and as a result, the community trusts us even more.
Nice.
Sheriff, one of the challenges I know you have, Chief Boland has, every law enforcement operation has the challenge of recruiting.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there's not a day goes by, if you're watching a national news show, it's some police officers involved in a shooting or injured on the job, seriously, or killed on the job. And that doesn't help
No.
recruiting. How are you going to be able to fully staff? I mean, this neighborhood policing, it requires more officers. What's your plan to recruit more officers?
As I mentioned before, few things are just the result of one or just two issues. And so our county council and our county commissioners have fully supported a really aggressive pay raise package for both sheriff deputies and even, actually maybe even more importantly, our jail officers. Our jail is chronically understaffed, and we are just now beginning to turn the tide on that hiring process. And we're going to need even more jailers to staff this expansion. And so the council's approved a really good competitive package that's going to attract more people to the profession. But just as importantly is improving the work environment within the jail so that our own jailers become our best ambassadors to recruit more individuals to come work. And so you're going to see the Sheriff's Office doing aggressive things like radio ads, which are now airing, billboard advertisements, digital ads, job fair participation, just getting the word out that the Sheriff's Office is a great place to work. Our pay is extremely competitive for the region, and you get free health insurance.
Can't beat that.
Is one of the, I'm interested in your views as a law enforcement professional, but it seems like all we ever do is expand the jail.
I know.
And we just keep warehousing human beings behind bars. Are you part of a community-based corrections discussion, at least in Vanderburgh County, that says maybe we ought to quit sending you so many people to feed and house.
You know, I was having a conversation with a local elected official recently discussing the community corrections program, which Judge Trockman and I jointly run. And I defended the program because we have upwards of 400 individuals who are either on electronic home detention, therapeutic work release, or participating in drug court. 400 individuals that, but not for those programs, they would either be in jail or state prison. So I'm very mindful that our incarceration patterns in this country pale in comparison to any of our peers. We incarcerate more people than anyone else in any other civilized nation. We're doing something wrong. But I will always have room in that jail for a violent offender or an offender who victimizes other individuals.
Absolutely. And how many are in your jail right now? What's your
So we have 810 inmates, just check the stats today, 810 inmates in the facility right now. That is divided between 688 on our physical footprint here in Vanderburgh County and 122 that we have shipped out to surrounding counties for a total of 810. Our capacity is 546. It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and of those 810, how many would you say are drug-related offenders or charged with a drug-related crime?
Many are. I would say well over half are charged with a drug-related crime, but few are there just for drugs. You see a lot of commingling issues, drugs and other criminal offenses. A burglar who had drugs on them, a burglar who also has a history of drug offenses. So, again, these are people, not boxes.
But the burglar could be stealing money to support
the drug habit.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. So what we see is, from our own studies that USI has helped us with, we see upwards of 70% of our inmates reporting that they have a substance abuse problem severe enough to warrant immediate treatment.
Sheriff, let me ask you this. This is a question that's before all communities. The no bond situation. And Illinois has passed a law. They've eliminated bonds, and most, except for murderers, rapists, things of that nature. And that would reduce the jail population because 85% of the people in our jail are people that can't make bail. They can't even make a $250 cash bail. Would eliminating a bond or bail be a good idea, do you think?
I'm not a big fan of what I would call bumper sticker solutions, or eliminate all jail bond, or these kind of sweeping changes are rarely effective. They lead to unintended consequences. I don't feel someone with a low bond amount and a minor criminal history should be sitting in my jail. Absolutely not. But what do you do with the individual who routinely flaunts the court's orders, refuses to abide by the terms of their probation, doesn't show up to court when they're supposed to? What do you do with an individual like that who, if released, is simply not going to come back? I can think of no other solution beyond having some form of reasonable bail. But I do believe it's a continual conversation and one that the courts should stay engaged on to make sure that we're not keeping people in that jail excessively long periods of time on low bond amounts.
You've been in the job since January. What's the single biggest issue facing the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Department today?
The singular issue that I confront every day is preparing for this jail expansion. From an administrative standpoint, that takes up a lot of my time and energy. It's just preparing for this expansion, getting our staff and ready for the enormity of the task that's going to be coming up upon us. But a sheriff's office is unique from a police department in which we have our detention side of things. We watch all the inmates, especially the ones that the Evansville Police Department brings us, and then we have our law enforcement side. And the single biggest problem we have on the law enforcement side is ensuring that we have enough staff to field and take all of our runs and getting ahead of this gun violence and drug problems that we confront every single day. Law enforcement is continually asked to shoulder more burdens, and just keeping our staff energized and effective and engaged in the work they do and providing the best training that we can is a continual challenge for us. But we're meeting it and we're exceeding it.
In our final few minutes, I expect you have a bright future. I mean, you realigned the political parties. You were elected, so I know you're going to run for the second term. It might be too early to announce for that. But what do you aspire to?
I aspire to be a one-term sheriff who decides to be a two-term sheriff. That's all I aspire to.
So not like use it to go to Congress like Brad Ellsworth did, or I think Wedding has his eyes on a state legislative or dead seat maybe, and that sort of thing. You haven't thought about that?
I've been a law enforcement officer, for almost 23 years now, and being the sheriff of Vanderburgh County I can really imagine no higher honor than what I'm fulfilling right now. It is. If it wasn't a dream when I was younger, I never would have conceived of this. I'm so happy to be where I'm at right now. I have little thoughts for anything else.
You don't want to be a host on Shively and Shoulders?
I could only aspire to that. But you two were agreeing so much earlier. I don't see the point.
That concerns me.
Before we wind up, we should start with this. Tell the folks out there your background, where you went to school, all that. We got 1 minute to do all that.
1 minute. I was born right here in Evansville, grew up in Newburgh, and then went to Castle High School. And my first real job, full-time real job, was an officer for the Owensboro Police Department.
Wow.
But the pay was better over here, and it was closer to home. So I applied to the Vanderburgh County Sheriff's Office and was hired on by Sheriff Brad Ellsworth, and have been here ever since.
We're glad to have you here.
Homegrown. I like hearing that.
I like that.
Thank you.
Congratulations on
Thank
a
you.
race well run, and from everything I'm hearing, maybe you should have got my contribution.
It's not too late.
Great guest.
Well, he was, and I think that the service we do on these kinds of shows is it's not a political commercial. These are newly elected people who affect our lives, whether we know them or not, and we get a chance to let them see them.
Absolutely.
And hear them.
And I tell you what, it's a great way to become more informed of what's going on in your own backyard when you tune into Shively and Shoulders.
Well, and he was very articulate, well-reasoned, has a passion for the job.
Exactly.
And I loved hearing that he grew up went to Castle High School, Southern Indiana boy, done this for 23 years. This isn't a carpetbagger. This is a guy who's fulfilling a dream.
And he's committed to being a professional law enforcement person.
Yeah. I think he sort of announced for a second term.
Think so?
I think he did.
Well, then you better get your checkbook
Which is
out.
a scoop right here on Shively and Shoulders.
See you next month.